In this video, we're going to look at the Execute SQL task. You're going to find that this particular task is really quite easy to use and very useful. Let me show you how you do it. To use an Execute SQL task, you need to first grab it from the toolbox and place it on your control flow. Oops, wrong one. It's the next one down. There we go. The data flow and the Execute SQL tasks are definitely the two most commonly used tasks. You'll notice that the data flow has its own tab, but the Execute SQL task doesn't. Also, you can't put an Execute SQL task on a data flow. To make this work, you can double-click on it, or right-click and choose Edit. It brings up the dialog window. Here, you have to identify which data connection you want. So it needs to be a connection to a SQL Server database to execute SQL. But it can be using a variety of different choices, including ADO.NET. If I do choose ADO.NET, I have to make a new connection. However, if I choose OLEDB, I already have a connection made from the previous video. You can see it down here. So once again, we see that the connection type has to match your connection. Now from there, you can go through and create a SQL statement. You can type it into this tiny little box, but I strongly recommend that you instead go and click on the ellipse button and then type your code in here. In fact, I don't even recommend you type your code in here either. What I would recommend is you open up a development tool and type it in first and check it there. If you successfully installed the SQL Server Data Tools, you can come up to Tools, choose SQL Server, and New Query. If you haven't, you'll have to go through and open up SQL Server Manager Studio. I've successfully have the data tools installed on my machine, so I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. And the database I'm going to be using is, how about the, well, we already have a connection to Northwind, so I guess I'll need to be using that. So I'm connected to Northwind. Now I'll put some kind of command that I know will work. How about this? Create table SSIS demo. And we'll just give it something simple. How about column 1 is an integer? I don't think it gets much simpler than that. Put a semicolon there. It's not necessary, but it's considered a best practice. I'll right-click and execute this code. And of course, if I had wanted to, or needed to, if the SSIS tools, the SQL Server Data Tools were not installed successfully, I could just come over to Manager Studio and have performed the exact same action. New query window, paste, make sure I'm in the right database, and run the same code. Now, I can also add another line of code here. Insert into SSIS demo. Tell it which columns I want to insert into. And tell it what values I want to insert into. Highlight the lines of code and execute them. It says one row was affected, but let's look at the data. I'm going to use the up-down arrow keys to choose the table and hit enter. That way it will type it for me. Excellent. So we got one row of data. And I now know that this code works. I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to go back to my package. I'm going to right-click and choose Edit. When the window comes up, in the SQL statement, I'm going to paste this command in. Everything looks good until you go through and hit the ellipse button and find out that when I pasted the code into this little text box area, it only got the first line. I really need to paste from within this Enter SQL Query dialog to get all the lines. That's an important mistake, or a common mistake people make. You can't really tell too much from here if the statement's long, but hitting the ellipse button will do it. And remember that the ellipse button doesn't even show up until you click on it, and then it magically appears. With that, I can say OK. And it says I got an error message here. Let's see if I can figure out what that error message is. Insert. Oh, I forgot to choose the connection. You can see that there's no options here. So I need to click on the connection here and see that magic little icon show up. Choose Northwind and then close it. Ah, the error's gone. Now I can execute this code. I'll stop it. I'll go back to my query window and see if I've got the new value. Oops, execute. Excellent, I got another value in there. So it worked, and as you can see, using an Execute SQL task is really quite simple. Later on, we'll use it to execute stored procedures and do a variety of things. But that's the basics of how you use it. Well, that's it for understanding how to use the Execute SQL task. It's a beginning step. We'll be using it quite a bit more later on. But for right now, I want to talk about how to test your package and do some basic troubleshooting. And that's going to be the topic of our next video, so I'll see you there.